Alright, Diablo 4 players, Season 7's best mythic items, which are the ones that you want to hopefully get to drop, or more essentially, which ones you want to start crafting ASAP, because these are going to get your build to get even more power. Now, what we're going to use as a reference for this video is the pit leaderboards. These are basically all of the top tier players and essentially what they are running for their builds. I got in front of me all of the different builds. Some of these are from across the world over here, but there's one common theme that you'll see, and that is that every single one of these builds is playing the chess piece, which is basically what I would recommend you guys to craft first. So this one is in the S tier. If we're making a tier list, Shroud of False Death is going to be the best. And I'll also kind of explain why, because sometimes people want to know what's the best mythic for my build and why. And I have to stress, for this item, it's across all classes, but some of these other ones that we're going to be talking about that are like best in slot, your build might not be able to play it, so just keep that info. But for starters, Shroud of False Death is going to be one of the top tier ones. Now, the stats aren't bad on it. It's got all stats, which is great for builds to hit all of the yellow nodes up on the Paragon board. And then also giving you max life is really good. And some builds can make utilization of, let's say, the damage after next attack after entering stealth, or the resource gem. But it's primarily used for the passive that you're going to be getting, which is going to be the +1 to all passives. The reason why that this is so big is that there's all these other small things on basically every single class that gives you extra damage reduction, extra utility, extra resource, extra lucky hit to generate barrier, or just something to make your character more powerful. And you're seeing this in basically every single build because of specifically that 1 to all passives. That's what it's really used for. And again, all stats is great, max life is great, but the main thing that you're using it for is that. And that's basically the reason why you want to craft this ASAP. Now, what about in the second one? Maybe you already have Shroud of False Death. What's the next mythic to focus in on? Now, I'm going to say this depends on your build. If you're playing, let's say, Barb or, let's say, the Sork, then Ring of the Starless Skies or Heir of Perdition is going to be kind of like your best in slot. If you're playing the Druid, you can only really run this because you need Tempest Roar. However, I have seen people play with the Harlequin just to get extra CDR. It's not like the worst thing in the entire game, but this is Spiritborn over here. I know it's in Korean, but basically Shroud of False Death is the go-to. The reason why is because you have to play the Ebiwaka helmet in the Spiritborn build for the current best one, which is Quill Volley. So it really comes down to the best one, and the one that I recommend you guys to craft first is Shroud of False Death. But the other one, again, it's going to be Heir of Perdition or Ring of the Starless Skies. Those are pretty much the two other primary ones, and I will go over why. So for starters, the Ring of the Starless Skies, this one's really good specifically for your resources, but on top of that, it gives you massive amounts of attack speed. That critical strike chance is good too. Core skills, depending on what build you're playing, is quite a nice thing. Lucky hit chance can be utilized as well, but its main huge bonus is the resource cost reduction, and since you're spending a resource, you gain a huge multiplier of like 50x, which is basically above what anything else would give you in the game. So Ring of the Starless Skies is fantastic for so many different builds, and I really feel like for certain builds, even in the off-meta category, I like crafting this one first. And the reason why I like crafting this first, depending on what build you're playing, you'll have to factor that in, but it's because you have that resource cost reduction that can give you up to 50% resource cost reduction. That is massive, because that way you don't have to spend all of these little things that you would activate for generators or resources. You could just spam your ability that does the big damage, right? That's why it is so dang powerful. And then with Heir of Perdition, this is the helmet. This is, again, both of these I'd put in like, A tier, right? So Heir of Perdition, Ring of Starless Skies are the next ones I would craft. And Heir of Perdition, depending on the build that you're playing, is going to be very powerful for specifically getting that critical strike chance that is massive. You also get a multiplier on 200% damage to angels and demons. It's on like the implicit, where it says 200% damage to angels and demons. Now, we don't, as far as I'm aware, have angels in the game. That's probably going to be better for later in the game, but basically, yes, you get 200% damage as an implicit, which is cool. And then on top of that, you are getting the bonus where it's in like white right here, where it says you get to succumb to hatred. Now, keep in mind, most people are using these to push solo builds, but if you're in a group, this could actually transfer to other players, but basically you get 60x damage, and there used to be a way to double dip this, but basically that's the reason why you play. It just gives you insane amount of crit. Specifically the Necromancer, it's a very nice thing to have, because it lets a lot of the other pieces of gear not have to require crit, because, well, most builds want to try to get 100% crit. If you're playing something like the Rogue, though, you will not really need to go for that, because you have Cowl of the Nameless, and you can also technically snapshot if you wanted to run the concealment, and then you're just going to get 100% crit. So there's certain builds that can benefit off of it more than others. Like if you're playing Druid, well, you need Tempest Roar, but you can always get 100% crit anyways. So that's why the Heir of Perdition is going to be a really solid like second. It's, again, Ring of Stars, guys, or Heir of Perdition, depending on the build that you're playing. That could be good. And I still want to give a shout out to Harlequin Crest. It's still a really good item. There are still builds in the top 10, like in any of these listings, although the ones I'm showing you guys are all pretty much like the rank 1s. But there are still a lot of builds that can run this. It is still a good item. It gives you crazy amounts of armor, that crazy amounts of cooldown reduction. Plus 4 ranks to all skills is great. That gives you extra cooldown reduction, extra utility, duration. It's really good overall for survivability, granting you a bunch of damage reduction, which would normally be on, like, let's say an aspect. But again, if we're talking about numbers in terms of damage, which is kind of the most important thing when you're looking at like rank 1 pushings in the game, well, it just simply loses out on the damage that the Heir of Perdition has. But I still think that is a step above the rest of the items in the game. But yeah, don't skip on a Harlequin. If you happen to get a Harlequin, like it just drops, and you want to craft the Heir of Perdition, don't feel like you have to craft the Heir of Perdition. You can just craft Starless, guys, and it'll feel a lot more comfortable. That way you can still have like a really good slot over there. But as far as it goes, I would say these are the top 4 over here. So the S tier, which is the Shroud of False Death, that chest piece, that's like the #1 choice for all builds, okay? And then the A tier, depending on which build you're playing, you could consider these two. And then I still think Harlequin is a pretty solid one overall. Now the rest of them, they're kind of like off meta. I'll talk briefly about them because I don't want this video to be unnecessarily long. But for the most part, it just comes down to they don't do damage. They give you some sort of survivability. Andariel's, though, is kind of fun, and there is a Spiritborn build. There is actually a Rogue build that you can use with Andariel's. Andariel's gives you crazy amounts of attack speed. That's one thing that it still gives off like a good potential for any dot builds, but there's actually a couple different things that just recently got disabled, which is one of like the auras. But basically, Andariel's has a lot of potential, and I think it's more of a fun item. So if you want to mess around with Andariel's, I still think it has some play, but don't expect it to be like the S tier absolute best build in the game, but expect it to kind of have some sort of like a niche playstyle if you want to make a build around it, and it could still definitely be an okay build. I would say Andariel's could be something to go ahead and craft. But the rest of the items, the ones I'm going to mention that are in what I'm putting in the C tier, which is kind of like the average, most of the time there is just going to be something that's better, even if it's just like a legendary or let's say unique, because uniques got heavily buffed throughout the course of the history. But I still think Doombringer is a pretty good item for survivability. Giving you that maximum HP is quite nice. So that's why I put it in the C tier. It's still a pretty good item for survivability, but most people, again, at this point want damage. Grandfather has simply been outclassed. It's weird because like Barbs almost always required Grandfather, right? But now with the two-handed aspects, with the tempering, and all of the different things that we've got added into the game, since they also buffed up a bunch of the aspects, Grandfather just loses out on some value in the super late stages of the game. But I still think it's an okay item. That's why I'm still putting it in the C tier. Still an item that if you want to mess around with, it's fine. If you want survivability, Tyrael's Might is probably one of the top tier armors, giving you a bunch of damage reduction, as well as giving you all of your resistances basically capped, and then also maximum resistances is a really good step. But keep in mind, Shroud of False Death is still really good on the defensive side. It's just that if you really want to min-max in survivability, Tyrael's is going to be your go-to, and it does give you basically a stat that is like very rare, which is maximum resistance to all elements. But in Diablo 4, I'm gonna be real with you guys, you don't really need to completely max out your resistances. Armor at 1000 is required, pretty much if you want to do like, you know, end game content. But resistances, if you guys remember from last season, it's kind of the same. It's kind of optional. If you get, as long as you're not in like the negative, you'll kind of be okay, I'll be honest. So maybe they need to make it a little bit stronger for resistances or make more penalties. I don't know. Either way, the way I see it is Tyrael's is just used for more survivability, which is great if you need it. But as far as in like the F tier, all these other ones that basically no builds used over here, I'm talking Melted Heart, Selig, Nasikem, Averon, Spear. Like the reason why these are just bad is like, it uses up a two-handed. A two-handed requires you to like sacrifice an aspect that gets doubled in its stats. Even though like you look at this and be like, wow, that's actually pretty good. It's got 200 to all stats, 1200 life. Like these are great stats. But the problem is like you have like this chance to make you have this guaranteed crit strike and overpower, but like you could just run like a Kipalike and pretty much just run a build to get that anyways. And even though at the time that we had that build in Spiritborn Super OP, no one even ran this anyways because, well, it only does it 10 times when you could just have it infinite times. This is a pretty big gap, right? And then looking at some of the other items, again, it's just basically the same reasons. It's just that it doesn't give you enough damage. Melted Heart Selig is, again, really good for survivability. You have this, like, you drain your resources instead of your HP, but, like, we need damage, not damage reduction in terms of the end game. But if you really want to, I guess you could run. I just don't see there to be any real area where Melted Heart of Selig can really thrive. Like, maybe if Naseekum of Herald, they buff it next season, they guarantee the overpower and crit on every single hit, maybe, and they buff up some of the other numbers, maybe you could see some play. But, like, I just don't see, there's no stat that they can buff on Melted Heart of Selig other than that damage reduction while healthy is like just through the roof. But even then, I don't think people want to run it because they really want damage, not damage reduction. Maybe if they put that lucky hit chance like 1000% or something crazy, then you'd have some sort of cool niche thing where you can lucky hit on every single time, or technically you can get even like double lucky hits on certain skills. But for the most part, there's just nothing that can make this amulet actually good. It's objectively probably one of the worst items in the game, and I just don't see them really changing any of these numbers to those numbers that I mentioned, like 1000% lucky chance. They probably won't do it. Maybe they'll be like, here's 10% movement speed, here's like, they could buff all this up by like 10-20%, and it still wouldn't matter. They need to probably rework this item. The only time it was ever good was when it gave you immortality, but they nerfed that, so it doesn't work anymore. And then the spear, like, you get a random shrine effect. Does someone really want to rely off of RNG and sacrificing again the two-handed aspect? More than likely not. And then on top of that, like, movement speed, while it's a more premium stat, like, you don't really need defensive stats. You're losing on your tempers, which has like a chance for fireball, chance for chain lightning, or whatever skill that you're playing in whatever season, these things to cast 2 times. There's just no giving that up on a weapon slot, and that ties into a lot of these actually, whereas like you have like Quill Volley activating 2 times, or a Twisting Blade does double damage or activates twice. That's the main reason why a lot of these like weapons in the Mythic category just kind of fell off in terms of the game, unless we can get tempers on our Mythic items. Again, I just kind of want to also explain why like these are in the F tier, like no one plays these, because even though someone might get super excited, because I see sometimes people ask in the chat while I'm streaming, they're like, hey Slater, I just dropped my Shattered Vow, what build do I play with it? And I tell you, you instantly incinerate that thing, get a spark, and then craft something that's actually good. Well, you might think, wow, that's great for damage over time. You're losing a multiplier, you're losing out on basically double damage for your not only aspect, but the damage of your actual skill, whether that's like a crushing hand or whatever. It's, again, the double damage or skill to activate 2 times. So you lose out on that and the two-handed aspect. It's simply just too much to give up. And that pretty much sums it up, and that's why this is the current tier list. As far as the Mythics go, this is kind of more like in the objective category versus sometimes I'll make subjective videos, but I want to say like objectively, there's a huge gap between like all of these other Mythic weapons versus like, at least these ones give you some sort of ability. These ones, I mean, sure, one of them gives you 1200 life, but for the most part, this is kind of what we're looking at, and that's like the best Mythics to go ahead and make in this season for Season 7. But if there's anything else that I missed out on, or some other crazy 500 IQ like immortality build that you can run with something else, let me know, and I will be updating this tier list in the future. But for now, I would say this is pretty much what it looks like in terms of Season 7 for the best Mythics to go ahead and craft. So anyways, there you have it. Anyways, if you guys enjoyed the video, drop a like on it. If you're new here, hit subscribe, turn the bell if you want to be up to date. And if you guys want to learn how to farm the Mythics, because now that you guys know which ones to make, I'm going to be updating you guys on a video guide very soon on which areas that you want to try to farm and which methods to actually gain all of those sparks. But we'll be dropping that very soon, so it's happening to see it. Catch you guys in the next video. Have a good one. Peace out.